because maybe you'd like to hear a bit.
The first part, right here. Are you doing that? No, you're doing it.
Okay. We're going to read you, as a matter of fact, the first few lines, the opening of the book. Shows you a bit her sense of humor, too. I hesitated a long time before writing a book on woman. The subject is irritating, especially for women. And it is not new. Enough ink has flowed over the quarrel about feminism. It is now almost over. Let's not talk about it anymore. Yet, it is still being talked about, and the volumes of idiocies churned out over this past century do not seem to have clarified the problem. Besides, is there a problem, and what is it? So 800 pages later, and so that is the opening, and this is the closing of the introduction, okay? But what's singular... I'm too close, I'm sorry. Not used to this. But what singularly defines the situation of woman is that being, like all humans, an autonomous freedom, she discovers and chooses herself in a world where men force her to assume herself as other. Am I too close? It's okay. An attempt is made to freeze her as an object and doom her to immanence, since her transcendence will be forever transcended by another essential and sovereign consciousness. Woman's drama lies in this conflict between the fundamental claim of every subject, which always posits itself as essential, and the demands of a situation that constitutes her as inessential. How, in the feminine condition, can a human being accomplish herself? What paths are open to her? Which ones lead to dead ends? How can she find independence within dependence? What circumstances limit women's freedom, and can she overcome them? These are the fundamental questions we would like to elucidate. This means that in focusing on the individual's possibilities, we will define these possibilities not in terms of happiness, but in terms of freedom. Clearly, this problem would have no meaning if we thought that a physiological, psychological, or economic destiny weighed on woman. So we will begin by discussing woman from a biological, psychoanalytical, and historical materialist point of view. We will then attempt to positively demonstrate how feminine reality has been constituted, why woman has been defined as other, and what the consequences have been from men's point of view. Then we will describe the world from the woman's point of view, such as it is offered her, and we will see the difficulties women are up against just when, trying to escape the sphere they have been assigned until now, they seek to be part of the human Mitsein. It's a great project. What's this one?
Okay. This is the end. This is the end of The Independent Woman, which is just before the conclusion. To explain her limits, we must refer to her situation and not to a mysterious essence. The future remains wide open. The idea that woman has no creative genius, in quotes, has been defended ad nauseum. Besides, the idea of a given creative instinct must be rejected, like that of the eternal feminine, and put away in the attic of entities. Some misogynists affirm a bit more concretely that because women are neurotic, they will never create anything of value. But these same people often declare that genius is a neurosis. In any case, the example of Proust shows clearly enough that psychophysiological imbalance does not mean powerlessness or mediocrity. As for the argument drawn from history, we have just seen what we should think of it. The historical past cannot be considered as defining an eternal truth. It merely translates a situation that is showing itself to be historical precisely in that it is in the process of changing. How could women ever have had genius when all possibility of accomplishing a work of genius, or just a work, was refused them? Old Europe formerly heaped its contempt on barbarian Americans for possessing neither artists nor writers. Let us live before asking us to justify our existence, Jefferson wrote in Essence. Blacks give the same answer to racists who reproach them for not having produced a Whitman or Melville. Neither can the French proletariat invoke a name like Racine or Mallarmé. The free woman is just being born. When she conquers herself, she will perhaps justify Rimbaud's prophecy, quote, poets will be. When woman's infinite servitude is broken, when she lives for herself and by herself, man, abominable until now, giving her her freedom, she too will be a poet. Woman will find the unknown. Will her worlds of ideas differ from ours? She will find strange, unfathomable, repugnant, delicious things. We will take them. We will understand them. End of quote. Her worlds of ideas are not necessarily different from men's, because she will free herself by assimilating them. To know how singular she will remain and how important these singularities will continue to be, one would have to make some foolhardy predictions. What is beyond doubt is that until now, women's possibilities have been stifled and lost to humanity. And in her and everyone's interest, it is high time she be left to take her own chances. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sheila and Connie. We are going to move on to Anna Bogic and report on the life and times of Howard Parsley and the translation, the first version. And then the floor will be open for questions to Sheila and Connie and to the two of us as well from translation. And we look forward to lots of discussion. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Good evening. I would like to thank Peter Connor and Barnard College for inviting me here for this fantastic event. I would just like to begin with a quote. I must say to begin with that translating has always been dog's work, never well paid, and seldom, if ever, bringing the translator any glory. And I will explain, but for those of you who'd like to be translators, it's something to think about, myself included. I would like to briefly just talk about the research that I conducted for my master's thesis at the University of Ottawa in Canada with Luise von Flotow. It's within the translation studies, a newly emerging and very dynamic field. The project involved analyzing within the framework of sociology of translation, which is the new current in translation studies. And I included Pierre Bourdieu's and Bruno Latour's theories, trying to, in my attempt to explain this very interesting case study, which is the first translation, English translation of Le Deuxième Sexe. What drove me to investigate further into this case study was my curiosity. I wanted to discover who this translator was, this man who translated the feminist Bible. He was being accused of sexist selecting. He was being also, by other people, called a man of eminent integrity. So I wanted to find out more. And in order to do so, I went to the Smith College archives in Northampton, Massachusetts, where I found letter correspondence. I wasn't the first one to read them. I did find out from the president of the Simone de Beauvoir Society, Yolanda Patterson, that these letters do exist. And they were donated to the archives by translator's daughter, Elsa Parsley Brown. So the letters, there's at least 100, 150 letters. These are just copies of some of the letters that I have. And they are very fascinating. They include the correspondence between the translator, the publisher, Alfred A. Knopf, the president, vice president, Blanche Knopf, the editor-in-chief, Harold Strauss, reviewers of the book, as well as other editors and some writers that he corresponded with after the translation was published. What was most intriguing about the letters was the fact that I could find answers to the criticism that Luise has mentioned, that you have also mentioned, the criticism that started with Margaret Simons' article in 1983. And some of the criticism were very harsh, and some of it was quite fair and justified. And the letters included all of the decision-making, the details, the opinions of the translator, the editor, their own, prejudices, everything they thought about, and also their personality came through quite clearly. Interestingly, there was a lot of disagreement. There were some battles between the translator and the publisher when they were making decisions about the style, the tone of the book, every single, even the minute details, the words that the translator could use. He could not use Latin forms. He could not use these words. They were esoteric words. He was accused of using too many words that would send the translator to the dictionary, and that was a no-no. And another thing that was very fascinating was that these letters were written between 1949 and 1953. So at that time, phone calls were basically very expensive, and people didn't really use the phone. So the correspondent was very lucky that basically 95% of the conversations and the dialogue was recorded in the letters. There was only one telephone conversation. And the big question is, who was Howard Parsley? It's very interesting in order to understand what happened during the translation process. So Howard Parsley was a professor of zoology at Smith College in Northampton. And he worked in the fields of entomology, genetics, and science of reproduction. He had published several books and many articles on sexuality in the 1930s. He had also studied French and Latin at the Boston Latin School, and then later he graduated with a PhD in entomology from Harvard University in 1917. So his knowledge of French was pretty good by academic standards, but this was the first book that he was going to translate into English from French. He had never actually translated anything. However, he was very eager. He was very passionate about the book, and once he had read it, he was definitely convinced that he should do it, despite the warning. And Knopf hired him. And he started this very long job, as you know, close to 1,000 pages, almost 300,000 words. And it took him about a year and a half to translate it. He finished in August 1951. And then he spent another year and a half kind of corresponding with the editor-in-chief and going over the revision. And that's where the most interesting letters are. He also corresponded with Blanche Knopf and other editors. What's very interesting, I found I'd like to share, there are many letters, there are many quotations. I can just show you, for example, one, what Parsley thought of the book. He said, Simone's book is no superficial popular treatise. It is for literate and serious readers. I feel it would be a crime to try to jazz it up. So this was written in February 1950, so this was during the translation, and he was already getting a lot of feedback. You need to change this is too difficult, or we don't like your tone of voice or the style. But in February 1953, the truncated version of the English translation was finally officially published to critical but generally approving reviews. As some of you may know, the French reception of the source text was quite brutal when Simone de Beauvoir published it in 1949. In the United States, it was also critical, but not to the same extent. Between basically February and May of that year, Parsley carefully watched the reviews, and he also corresponded with the reviewers who criticized the translation and mostly Beauvoir's ideas. So he truly believed in them. And he said in one of the letters, I would never have undertaken the work if I had not considered its quality high and its main message, transcendence for women too, not only morally and socially desirable, but also too often denied even in America.